Right, let us get the show on the road. A marginally better picture in the headline figure where South Africa's unemployment dipped slightly to 31.4% in the fourth quarter of 2025. However, the youth unemployment crisis persists, with youth unemployment rising to 43.8%. And part of the structural headwind is the skills gap. To address this, in the 2026 State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the message that the ground is being prepared for a skills revolution. And to give us insight on the skills revolution for South Africa's youth economy is Sharmi Surianarain, Chief Impact Officer at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Thank you so much for your time, Sharmi. And actually, I read a note that Harambee posted that highlighted that the youth unemployment crisis is no longer a social emergency, but it is a structural growth constraint. And that really highlights that the solution can no longer be a band-aid. So just looking at the skills revolution, right, that is being prepared for, what exactly is the ideal way to go about this, and what needs to be different about it that's different from what's been done before?
Thank you, Zanati. It's great to be on your show. Firstly, just a few points of context. In the past 15 years, even though our GDP growth has been slow, job growth, even if low, has benefited non-youth more than youth. And this is not, unfortunately, a problem unique to South Africa. We are just compounded by our legacy of exclusion and our legacy of dependence on fairly extractive industries which have been declining. So the youth unemployment rate, yes, it is a crisis, and we've stemmed the tide with many scaling successful initiatives like Harambee, SA Youth, and partners, but we haven't reversed the tide. And it is time for a skills revolution. And we've identified a few specific areas, both sectors that are growing, that can absorb young people due to lower barriers to entry, like services. And services can include tourism, retail and hospitality, and global business services. But very importantly, skilling for these growth sectors has to be three things: demand-led, which is adaptive, not just training for the sake of training, but demand-led. What does the job actually need? Secondly, stackable. It has to be something that builds to something, micro-credentialing rather than lengthy and outdated programs, work experience rather than lengthy training. And lastly, it has to be outcomes funded. So you have to actually pay for training that gets someone into the job, not just for training's sake. And it has to be co-financed by employers, because employers actually know what skills they need for jobs that they have.
Yeah. And actually here we're looking at a dual training model, right, that really integrates education with practical workplace experience. What part of the education journey then should this start, right? Is it higher education institutions where you are learning but also getting that work experience, or does it start from high school, for example? Because a lot of people say that it should start when someone is young.
So let me make a couple of sort of contextual points again. The purpose of education and skilling should not be conflated. Education is lifelong. We need active citizens, we need creatives, we need people who actually participate in the economy, not just as workers, right? So education is vital, and we congratulate the last matric cohort for 88%. It's worthy of congratulation. That said, skilling has to be for a job. And yes, there has to be an overlap, but it cannot replace each other. And importantly, the skilling system has unfortunately been paying the price of a failing education system, but it cannot take the place of an education system. And while we can introduce concepts that are work readiness and entrepreneurship in high school curricula, etc., we can never replace what's important for young people that is required of them for lifelong learning. So I think education and skilling have to sort of work hand in glove. And very importantly, they need to actually complement each other. And skilling should be short, sharp, efficient, demand-led, and cheaper. Might I add, education is actually about lifelong learning. And in this day and age of AI, has to be supporting young people and children all over to be adaptive and agile.
Well, you mentioned this age of AI, and let's actually talk about the kinds of skills that the youth need to be training for, because there seems to be a tension between the jobs of the past and the jobs of the future. Have we decided what jobs are going to be obsolete and what jobs are going to be the drivers of the future economy? And how do you then approach what you build the skills revolution around?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have data. And I think for me, the data is the proof in the pudding, right? So entry-level work is going to be affected, some entry-level work, and it's more tasks than for wholesale jobs.
Yes.
Tasks will be reshaped and jobs won't be eliminated, they will be reshaped. And they say, those that know how to use AI will advance in the game. So for us, it's about looking at what portions of tasks are being eliminated or shifted and preparing for those. We do so even in our own contact center, for example. We use adaptive AI to help reduce the work of our contact center agents on mundane tasks like password resets, which frees them up to actually do more important work, like coaching young people on how to find a job. The same applies across job families, but it is really up to us to design a workforce, and both in terms of the supply side, young people coming into the labor market, as well as jobs that can take advantage of the AI revolution rather than being threatened by it, but we do have to be 3 steps ahead of it. So I do think that it isn't a cause for panic, it is a cause for preparation, and we do have to be strategic in order to make sure our young people benefit from it. We have many employers that are actually using adaptive AI to both skill up their workforce and get ahead of the game, but also to create new jobs. We have instances, for example, of contact center agents supporting workforces to use Copilot. So they're training. So that's a new job that never existed before. So the use of agentic AI is actually creating new jobs, reshaping entry-level work, but we do need to design and be strategic for it to benefit our young people.
Well, talking about design, I mean, Sharmi, it's not just about skills and labor supply and demand. The real economy thrives on enabling regulation that is certain and that is predictable. Are there any pressing regulatory changes or reforms that need to be addressed to make this skills revolution effective? And maybe just also on how then, or the appetite that companies will have on absorbing people that have these skills?
I think you're hitting on a very important point. Again, some points of context. South Africa is quite lucky in that we have institutions that are set up for funding of skills. These need a little bit of a refresh. So they need to be more focused on outcomes-led funding. So outcomes, as I mentioned, job placement, not just training. They have to be demand-led and responsive to employer needs. So there needs to be constant dialogue. And because jobs are changing so quickly, they can't be lengthy certification, et cetera, and requirements that these regulations need to change. And this is a conversation that, thankfully, several departments are taking on board, including DHET, the Department of Trade and Industry, and many government partners in partnership with the private sector. But the pace is not enough. The scale is not enough. We need a lot more, and we need employers to come on board. Great examples of this include the Jobs Boost Fund, which was designed as an outcomes fund with employers' skin in the game to help specifically drive skilling for job placement in high growth sectors for young people. The National Skills Fund actually has helped push this forward to scale. So examples of this need to be amplified and accelerated if we are to take advantage of the skilling revolution.
Sharmi, it's not just about being employed, right? It's also about creating businesses, and particularly businesses that are youth-owned. So how should this skills revolution feed through to entrepreneurship?
So glad you mentioned that. So there's 2 or 3 points to note on entrepreneurship. One is that South Africa's economy, to quote Professor Haroon Borat, is rather oddly shaped. For a country of our size GDP, typically you'd have 45% in the formal sector, 45% in the informal sector, the rest unemployed. Ours is skewed. We have fewer jobs overall, but 50% of those are formal sector jobs, roughly 16% in the informal sector, rest is unemployed. So we have an oddly shaped economy given the size of our GDP. That needs to change. It's a structural issue. It's because we had structural exclusion due to apartheid, et cetera. But we have a formality bias, and that needs to shift. So in answer to your question, entrepreneurship is vital, but we need to fix both the supply side and the demand side. We need to get young people excited about entrepreneurship, not to see it just as a fallback option, because right now, unfortunately, it is, and it is too precarious. Our own data from SA Youth suggests that young people earn way less, for example, 700 Rand a month, which is not even living wage, on entrepreneurship hustles. And on the demand side, we need to make it easier for them to sell things and create market access and make it easier for people to actually run businesses rather than criminalize informality. So there's structural constraints on both sides. We need a thriving economy that is less constrained, and we can't, have a formality bias alone. So we also have to understand that regulation and skilling needs to support that. So entrepreneurship programs, for example, need to understand the context of a young person. We can't be teaching people business skills that are about, for example, launching a large-scale enterprise when the reality is they're braiding hair or selling fat cooks. It's a very different mindset. We need financial literacy. We need basics of how to formalize and run a business. And that reality must be taken into consideration when we actually think of skilling for the new economy.
All right, well, we do have to wrap up this conversation, but I mean, this is a very, very important conversation that we do need to take forward. We could talk for an hour, but thank you so much for your time, Sharmi. That was Sharmi Surianarain, Chief Impact Officer at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Well, let's take a quick break. When we return, we'll be back with the results of Sibanye Stillwater.